Hi, I'm Marty Miller here with co-host Wendy Batts. And on this episode of the Master Instructor Roundtable, Wendy and myself are going to talk about unlocking the hips, give you some key takeaways. Wendy, can you give them a little more about this episode?
Yes, we're going to go over some issues that you're going to find when you're doing the assessment. So we're going to talk a lot about the lower cross syndrome. So we hope that you enjoy the upcoming episode, but be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and leave a comment and let us know how we did. And if you want us to talk about something specific in the future, enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Master Instructor Roundtable. I am Wendy Batts here with my friend and co-host, Marty Miller. Dr. Miller, how's it going?
I'm good, Wendy. How's everything over there in Atlanta?
Everything is great. And this week, we are going to be talking about unlocking the hips. The hips are an area, obviously, that we spend a ton of time talking about because the lumbopelvic hip complex is extremely important. And we know, obviously, that the hips can tell the knees what to do. It tells us what's going on in the lower back. I mean, everything's connected, but the power is through the hips. So we're going to spend some time talking about that for sure.
Important, and I'm still working on mine. We'll get there.
Marty, the hips don't lie. So,
no, that's what I've heard.
I think somebody's even had a song about that. But this week, we're going to talk about why the hips matter. We're going to talk about some common imbalances. And again, Marty and we've done so many different assessments on the hips. So we can't hit each and every muscle and common compensation. So we are going to talk about one specific syndrome today. But how do we know what they have? Basically through the movement assessment. So we are going to go through that. And as always, we don't want to leave you hanging. So we're going to give you some corrective strategies to follow along with.
Good goals that we set here. So first, let's talk about why the hip complex matters. I think all of you that are NASM certified have looked through the material. You've heard LPHC, lumbopelvic hip complex, basically from day one, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. So it's one of the most mobile and powerful joints in the body, right? It's where if you want to be a good athlete, and I don't care what the level you want to compete at, but if you want to be athletic, you need good hips. If you want to prevent low back pain throughout your life, you need good hips. You want to burn a lot of calories and do great exercises, you're going to need good hips. So this is for everybody. Due to modern lifestyle, like right now, Wendy and I are sacrificing by sitting to record this podcast. So a lot of people, they're in this position for a long period of time. It's often underused, it's tight, there's imbalances, and even some of the training programs, Wendy, that I know you and I see, seated leg curl, seated leg extension, seated leg press. And I'm not saying you couldn't sprinkle those in, but we need to get people out of that locked position, right? We know that there's a massive amount of people in this country that have low back pain, then could have knee issues, poor posture. We talked about why it's so important for athleticism. So if you don't have it, you'd have decreased athletic performance, and then you're going to get a lot of compensation injuries. So that's why we're attacking the hips today.
Yes, because I mean, how many people come to you? And if you read even the opening line of the NASM textbooks, like 80% of the population at one point in time have either had or will have low back pain. So, you look at these are common ways of thinking about it. Of course, we're going to look at the hips and what's going on. And you even said it, Marty, the power is in the hips, right? It's in the movements of that. And when we actually even look at the picture that was on the last slide, it showed, well, okay, if somebody's foot and ankle complex isn't even a good position. So, thanks. Our producer just brought it back. But if you can see, like, for example, if you're looking at our slides, we actually have a picture of a body that has ideal form, if you will, meaning alignment. And then one that what happens if there's pronation at the foot and ankle. So obviously, if the foot's going to pronate, think about what's happening. Our body weight is shifting inward. So think about the stress that's put on the medial knee. So when we have somebody that starts to go in, if their arches are falling, their knee is probably going to go into valgus. Well, guess what? If the knee goes into valgus, we're also either going to see a hip shift or we're going to see a dip. We're going to see a lot of things happening at the hip as well. And it actually started at the foot. So one of the reasons why we really emphasize it's very, very important that we start at the foot and ankle complex and work our way up is because it could be the big toe. It could be the ankle, it could be the knee, but remember the knee is kind of following along with the hip and ankle. So again, it really is all interconnected. And it's one of those things that when you actually look at it, you're like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense, because you can see the big shift at the hip. And, somebody sits down in a chair and they cross their legs all the time. Guess what? That shift in the hip over time becomes a repetitive movement. We start to see asymmetrical imbalances. There's a lot of things just based on life that we see. But I wanted to throw that diagram in there because I think it's important, because you're like, oh yeah, when you look at it, you're like, that totally makes sense, especially if you're confused reading a book.
And don't forget how we sleep, right?
Huh?
So the power of the hips in movement. So they act as a central link in the kinetic chain. They really connect the upper body and lower body. The lats attach onto the hips, which is the only muscle that truly attaches the upper and lower body. So it's center core of everything we do. It affects the lumbar spine, knees, gait, posture. Wendy, you talked about that with the image from the previous slide. And it will absolutely play a major role in performance and injury prevention. It's totally, the centerpiece of the body, but it is connected all the way down to the ground. Wendy, in our workshops we used to teach live, we'd have people raise their arch, lower their arch, raise their arch. Then we'd have them put their hand on their glute medius, and voila, it's moving, right? So it's going to be a key contributor to your entire lower kinetic chain.
Well, Marty, I think this is actually a really good time too. And I want to bring this up because I know you and I both, we started kind of our careers more along the lines of baseball. And I know I focused a lot with baseball pitchers on the injury prevention side, but you as an athletic trainer, and I know that you saw this a lot in games, and it's one of the things that we worked on when somebody would come in for shoulder rehab, or they would come in for like a Tommy John, and we were doing that. The number one area that we focused on, especially to try to make sure was fully functioning, besides range of motion, obviously, was power and movement quality, as well as muscle activation in the hips. So I actually had someone ask me this question, and I think it would be awesome if I asked you the same question, because I'd love your response. But why are the hips so important for a pitcher when aren't they really throwing from their shoulder, right? It's all about their arm positioning and their shoulder.
Gotcha. So here's, I'm gonna phrase this so our editor or our producer doesn't have to edit it. I've heard it said two ways. Mass is gas, or just take off the M is gas. And when they're saying gas, they're talking about velocity, right? So if you look at any good athlete, they usually have a good posterior chain, right? Now that doesn't mean it always functions in sequence the way it should. It doesn't mean they couldn't get hurt. But rarely you're going to see an athlete that makes it to the highest level without some glutes, right? That because it is your engine. It is the motor that drives the body. If you want to jump, if you want to run, if you want to be powerful, if you want to punch, if you want to kick, right? I did MMA for years, right? It's going to be the key component. So if you think about pitching, as you asked, Wendy, it's no different than a whip, right? The end of the whip is the explosive part, but the force starts from the handle, and as it transmits through the whip or to our extremity, the velocity picks up, the angular velocity picks up, my arm starts moving at higher degrees per second, and the ball just kind of naturally flows out. If I put somebody in a lunge position, same arm, and ask them to throw the ball as hard as possible, it's going to be a fraction of the overall velocity. Well, I let them still use their entire shoulder, but I didn't let them drive from the ground force reactions of the ground, drive their whole body with the force coming up through the kinetic chain, and use that leg to explode that arm forward in a sense. So that's where, if you want to take stress off your arm pitching, or stress off your arm throwing, or have more powerful punches, or etc., it's going to start from the ground, through the core, out the extremity.
I love it. That would be my answer too, and that actually was more of my answer. But it's one of those things where sometimes we just take it for granted. People think it's all about, yes, how their hand is positioned on the seam of the ball, how they're actually letting go of things. All of that is extremely important. But to your point, if you're lacking rotation and you're lacking activation in the glutes and the hips, you're going to pay the price on the speed. So if they're like, oh, he threw 100 miles an hour and it looks effortless. Well, look how much power is within his hip complex. And then that's one of the things that if you're working with professional athletes, you want to look at, even though there may be a primary primarily, oh, upper body. Well, guess what? You just said it. The lats attached to the lower back. And so guess what? The lats attached to the front of the arm. So they do coincide. A lot of it goes hand in hand. So when we do say it starts from the ground up, it really does. And another thing of why the hip complex matters that you're seeing now is if you don't have ideal range of motion, if you are seeing signs of dysfunction. So you're doing an assessment and you're seeing something like an anterior tilt, or excessive lumbar lordosis, which is basically excessive arching of the lower back. If you see that your hips are hiking, if you just see any kind of compensation patterns, like an asymmetrical weight shift, all of that is going to lead to dysfunction. And what is chicken or the egg? Did it start at the foot? Is it something else that's leading to that? Or is it just really, truly an issue at the actual hip? If you're thinking about something called the lower cross syndrome, especially if you've gone through our content, people talk about syndromes because we're kind of putting it together as a whole when something's not ideally functioning properly versus saying this is the specific thing that we're seeing on the assessment. So when we talk about lower cross syndrome, we're talking about it being characterized by muscle imbalances that disrupt the function of the lumbopelvic hip complex and often result in movement dysfunction, poor posture, and unfortunately pain. So we would say discomfort if they're coming to us, but pain. So, we want to obviously fix whatever these imbalances are. And again, that's why we hone in so much on not only the movement assessments, but mobility assessments when we can put them together to get the best results of what to do.
Yeah, Wendy, you addressed that so well. I don't really have anything to add. It's just you want to put your energy into exercises that improve posture, or once the posture is improved, you don't want to load a faulty movement system, because you're either going to get better at that faulty movement system or create stress and or injury. So Wendy, when we look at the overactive, underactive, we've gone through this in all of our courses before, but it's always good to kind of touch back on it here. Is overactive muscles would be the ones that could be chronically short, or the ones that are doing too much work. Underactive could be in a lengthened position or weak, right? So that's how it works. Underactive is kind of allowing the faulty motion. So in no particular order, the overactive could be the TFL, hip flexor complex, psoas, and adductors. Underactive would be the glute medius, glute max, and the deep core stabilizers. These will lead to altered pelvic alignment and then those inefficient movement patterns that we've already spoken about.
Yes. And where do we get this information? It would be off the solutions table. So guys, if you're really struggling on some of the differences, because is it a posterior tilt? Is it an anterior tilt? Is there a hip shift? What are you seeing? But just know all of these answers are easily found within the content of what NASM provides. It's one of the reasons I love it, is because when we say we took the guesswork out, we're giving you all the tools to make you successful, to know what to do. And until you're able just to rattle some of this off, it takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. And Marty, every once in a while, I'm like, what muscle am I forgetting? Because, it might be a compensation, what we're talking about, that I don't see as often. And so, things easily slip the mind, but it's a really good thing to print out, have on your clipboard if you're training or whatever, so you can reference it, even if you don't know it offhand. And it shows that you're going to have a good plan.
100% agree. So Wendy, you and I are big CES fans. We love it. And a couple of years back, they added these mobility kind of screens that help you identify movement dysfunction without having to take out the goniometer. So when we look at identifying hip dysfunction, if you're CPT and want to go deeper into the anatomy and have these mobility assessments, definitely check out the CES. And if you've done the CES a long time ago, and this is kind of like, sounds familiar, dig back into your material and you'll find it all there. So overhead squat assessment, we're looking for knee valgus and a hip shift. Does the pelvis move from one side to another? On the single leg squat, it'll reveal if there's glute medius weakness and or instability in the foot and ankle too, as a secondary, and some core weakness, but definitely the glute medius. The Thomas test, if you're watching the slides here, that's the one at the top. If you are driving and listening, thank you, be careful. But would be where you're off the edge of a table, you pull one knee into the chest, you let the other leg hang over, and you can tell what part of the hip flexor complex is tight, if they're above the table, abducted, or the knees extended. And then also the best one here, I like, not best one per se, but the best version for hip internal rotation would be the where you're prone, laying on your stomach, And, Wendy, we've talked about this before. It's almost like a windshield wiper. You keep your femurs in a nice straight position, bend your knees at 90 degrees, and just let gravity passively take you out, which would be hip internal rotation. And you're hopefully looking for 45 degrees on each leg. So very quick, very easy. Don't need to get too technical, but they're kind of pass fails, and then you know what to do after that.
Yes, I do the hip internal rotation one all the time. And I'm like, oh, and it's amazing when you see so many, there's not symmetry. Like you just would assume whatever you're seeing on one side, you're not seeing on another. I mean, I literally had a girl today that did this and her left side just flopped down like it was nothing. The right side, I'm like, okay, now do your right side. And she's like, I am. I literally thought she hadn't even started. So when I say that there's commonalities that we just assume it's going to affect both sides, guys, what is happening on one side doesn't always affect the other side. Even though when I looked at her overhead squat and her single leg squat, I didn't see what I saw until I started to look at the mobility assessments. And there is a significant difference on in those assessments in comparison, which has now given me a really good idea of exactly how I want to approach her programming. But it also makes sense. She's a soccer player, and it makes sense because of her plant leg, her kick leg, and then the issues that she's telling me about.
Right. And previous injury, all kinds of different things, right? So that's why we do these assessments. So we're not guessing. So, but Wendy, before we move on, I want to let everybody know that this episode of the Master Instructor Roundtable is brought to you by NASM One, the membership for trainers and coaches. Members enjoy unlimited access to hundreds of career resources. Get the Edge app to schedule and program clients. Enjoy half off all certifications and specializations and access to free CEUs and more. All of this just for $35 a month. Go to nasm.org/membership to learn more about NASM One.
All right. So once you have the assessments, right, we have the blueprint. We know what we know what we have. If we go to the next slide and we start thinking, okay, what do we do with this? Again, we're going to use this as the corrective exercise examples. Now, again, if you don't have your your CES, so if you're not a corrective exercise specialist or haven't gone through the content, this stuff still should not sound like it's Greek to you, because this is the beginning of what you would do in phase one. And often all of the different phases, it's just what you're doing on your stretching, or maybe your activation might be a little bit different. And so you're still going to start with inhibiting, which is foam rolling. So remember, down regulation of the overactive muscle. We're going to lengthen those muscles right after. Usually it's the same muscles, but there might be other muscles that you think would be important to statically stretch. That's easier to stretch than foam roll. Most of the time we pair them, not always. And then think about the other side, guys. So many people are like, well, I stretched this, then I did a dynamic warm up and they moved on. Well, dynamic warm-ups, I think, are fantastic. But if I'm trying to specifically work on one joint to increase range of motion, I want to really focus on the muscle that is controlling that joint on the opposite side. So we're going to look at what's overactive. We're going to go ahead and think about foam rolling and stretching that side. And then I'm immediately going to activate the muscle on the other side. So therefore, we're waking that muscle back up. There may be some activation there. I'm not saying it's just completely atrophied, right? I'm saying it's maybe working, but it's not working to its full potential. So now I have to have synergists come in to help it do its prime moving job. I don't want that. I want to break that chain, right? So from there, once I get good activation, we go into integration. And remember, integration is just a total body exercise. So we're integrating the upper and lower. We're trying to get multi joints to move. So even if it is more lower body, like hip down sequencing movement patterns, that's great. But it's more than just doing an anterior tip. That would be more activation. Now I'd be doing something like the squat to rep.
Great point. And this is what my warm-up and program looks like every day.
Yep. Let's give some examples.
Yeah. So just SMR, self-myofascial release, the techniques, foam roll, you've got here TFL. So that's the kind of that front, just lateral of the ASIS, or as your right, the bony prominence right in the very front part of your hip. Just to the side of that, it's one of the hip flexors that you can get to because it's superficial. Piriformis, I think we've all seen this, where you sit right on your glute, side lying a little bit, bring your knee across to the other, the ankle across to the other knee, get in there, that deep stabilizer of the femur underneath the glutes, and then your adductors. That one can wake you up a little bit if you've never foam rolled your adductors. And then you'd flip around and then just do the exact same lengthening techniques for those muscles. You can stretch all your hip flexors. It's hard to foam roll them all because they're so deep. Then you can also get into that short head of the bicep femoris, and then the lateral hip.
Indeed. All right. So then, of course, like we just said, if we're following the CES continuum, Marty just talked about, we just rolled this, we just stretched this. Okay. Think about activation. Well, we know that in a majority, if you're looking at that solutions table, guess what? One of the number one muscles, it's like underactive, and a majority of the compensations you see, and it's the glutes. So we really want to focus on glute bridging, and you can do them on the floor, on the ball, however you want to do them. It's just you want to make sure that it's primarily felt in the glutes. If you feel it in the hamstrings, walk your heels back towards your glutes. If you're feeling it in the quads, then walk your heels a little bit more forward. So therefore, you've got a better distance. If you feel it in your hamstrings, it's wrong. It should be primarily in the glutes. This is not a hamstring exercise. So I want to say that because I see it so often. Activation, because a lot of people, and you saw me put the picture of the example of the mobility for internal rotation, is because a lot of people are lacking hip internal rotation. So the picture at the top, if you're watching us or if you're driving, most people know what a clamshell is. Well, clamshells, we love to work on the outer hip, and that's one of the activation that we can do. But then you can also do a reverse clamshell, which I don't think we really emphasize enough, because you're keeping your knees together, but you're trying now to lift up your foot. So you're really focusing on moving the femur through the entire hip capsule. Marty and I have done another podcast really talking about mobility drills and how important those are. So this kind of works through the capsule on both sides. And then one of my favorites, the mini band tube walks. So again, I'm a huge advocate of lateral tube walks done correctly, side to side without tilting, no teacupping or anything. It's literally just moving in sequence the way that you're supposed to. And then incorporating, when I have F and B in there, it means forward and backward, because we're really focusing on terminal knee extension going backwards, and then ensuring that we've got movement pattern and quality of the knee in motion in a lateral stance.
Yeah, I love these, Wendy. I couldn't agree more. There's different variations of them. We've covered it in so many different podcasts. And then, from an integration standpoint, shocking that there's you have single leg, but just the fact that there's a cable squat to row helps people go from triple flexion to triple extension. Find me a better way to do it, and I'll use something different, right? That's the key point, because we're trying to get the calories burned, let them lift weights, but we're trying to drive proper movement patterns. So this is a great way to sneak that in. Step ups are phenomenal. Balance with knee drive, with, you can have a dumbbell in one hand, do a curl to a press, but they should be able to really do well on the step ups, and then you can add different planes of motion, and then have to spend time on a single leg. And we would beg you to do as much of these type of things when they're safe, in minimalist shoes and or socks or barefoot, if it's appropriate in the facility you're training in.
I know. And I always get why single leg balance? And it goes back to the picture that we showed you with the skeleton, that if they don't have good arch alignment, meaning they have weak medial arches, and they are going into pronation, you can see the kinetic chain effects of negatively how that can affect everything, including and especially the hips. So guys, really focus on balance work, because I think people are like, oh, balance is easy. And I will say it really is not. And doing a single leg balance with reach, with your shoes off, like you said, Marty, if it's safe, and going into all three planes of motion, that was one of my favorite things that we used to do in the 2-day workshop. Is we would go through core, ensuring that we're doing it, with good form and alignment and tempo, and then immediately going into a single leg balance with reach. How many of our trainers were like complaining about their foot burning? Which, if the feet burn and their arches are burning, that is actually showing you that they were weak and they're starting to work. Same thing if you're on the leg press and you think you're going to throw up because you're throwing up so much weight. You think that's a good thing, but if your foot burns, it's a bad thing. When in all reality, you're accomplishing the same goal, meaning that you're putting a lot of work into those muscles that haven't really been firing like they should.
That's a great point, Wendy. I do agree with that 100%. So, Wendy, I know that when we talked about this, we're like, man, there's so much we go into, but we wanted to give those high level takeaways that are actionable right away. And I feel that we accomplished that. But if you'd like to go through some of the key takeaways, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, again, there are so many different variations, and it really does depend on what the assessments are showing. What are you finding out? But remember, the hips influence the entire kinetic chain. That's why when we talk about the kinetic chain as like truly a chain that's a reactive force, that's why we say that, is because if there's dysfunction at one joint, it's going to affect many other joints, if not all. Don't guess. Assess. Always, 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 because assessments are going to tell you what to do. And then you can use the corrective exercise tools. But again, if you're following the template, even if you're just through your CPT, go through and you're going to see it's the exact same thing we just discussed. Sequence does matter because remember, we start with self-myofascial technique first because we're trying to inhibit muscles and downregulate that activity. Again, we're focusing on the overactive muscles. Where did we find out where those were? We looked at our solutions table and we found that. And if we didn't know, that was where we went. But then also the assessments told us what that was. Then whatever you inhibit, go into lengthening. Again, if we're trying to connect or correct the kinetic chain, we need to do static stretches. So we're trying to get length back into tissues that are overactive. We then will go in to activate the other side that has shown to allow those compensations to happen. And then we do a full body type exercise or multi-joint exercise. And then we go into our workout. So this is like what I call the movement prep. So to me, CES is your movement prep that gets you ready for the resistance part of your workout. Or if somebody has a lot of compensations, they're new to this may be their entire workout. You can do it either way. But no matter what, always focus on your form, your technique, and all the acute variables.
Well said. Love it. So, Wendy, why don't you give these amazing people your contact information?
Yes, if you have any questions, you can always contact me through email at wendy.batts@nasm.org, or you can find me on Instagram at wendy.batts13.
And my info is right here, right on cue, dr.martymiller72 for Instagram. And then my email, marty.miller@nasm.org if you need to reach me by email. So, Wendy, thanks for putting this together. It's an important topic just to kind of realign people with the importance of focusing on the hips. And for all of you that watched this week's episode, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Master Instructor Roundtable.